And get started. First, I want to say is I'm going to record this session. So if there is anybody who does not want to be recorded, I would ask you to please turn off your videos because we really do want to be able to record this so that other people can experience and enjoy the information that we are going to get today from Dr. Valencia. And with that, so good afternoon, fellow Riverbats and friends and teammates and team workers. We have an incredible session for us today at ACC. We will be learning a bit about the 2020 census, what that data means, what that data says, and who we are in Austin, Texas, and in the surrounding areas. This will lend us support through all of our work and efforts over the coming years on student success. I will be moderating today's event and collecting questions throughout, so please put your questions in the chat. We will be recording the session and posting it so that others can enjoy the information and knowledge we gain today. But today I'm distinctly privileged and honored to introduce Dr. Lila Valencia. She is the Austin City demographer. She leads the strategic initiatives team at the Housing and Planning Department and produces population estimates and projections to support planning and decision-making of city departments, local businesses, and organizations, and the community at large. Lila is an applied demographer with over 15 years of experience in quantitative and qualitative analysis in both the public and private sectors. Before her role at the city, Lila was a senior demographer at the Texas Demographic Center, where she monitored and reported demographic and socioeconomic trends to inform policymaking and planning for the state of Texas. She also oversaw product development for the center and led the 2020 census coordination efforts with varying stakeholders across the state. Previously, Lila served as a senior research analyst and compliance specialist at the City of Austin's Office of Police Monitor, where she fielded complaints of police misconduct allegations and produced analysis and annual reports documenting these allegations. She holds her PhD in applied demography from the University of Texas at San Antonio, a master's from the College of William and Mary in Virginia, a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Lila has lived in Austin for over 25 years and enjoys Austin's green spaces, live music, and cultural events with her husband, Michael, daughter, Ada, Amaya, and their new puppy. Please welcome Dr. Lila Valencia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the introduction, Daniel. I'm really excited to be back and to be able to share the latest data we have available. I know Daniel's gotten a sneak peek of these data, and so I'm looking forward to sharing the information with your team. And as he mentioned, I can make the slides available. I'm going to be sharing information with you from the latest release of the 2020 census data count. And those data come from the redistricting file. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen really quickly so I can make sure everything is working. Okay, let me know if that's looking good. Daniel, everything good? Okay, wonderful. So the data, like I said, come from the redistricting file. And so I'm going to share some top level information. The redistricting file included a lot of information, but it also doesn't include the full set of census count data that we typically see. Those are still being processed and will be made available next year. But what we have in this set of data are total population counts, total housing unit counts, population by race and ethnicity, voting age population or population 18 and older, and then group quarters population or population that live in like college dormitories or nursing home facilities, that sort of group setting. So let me go ahead and get started. And I just wanted to mention that because, I won't have a lot of socioeconomic indicators or information of that type in here, but I will talk a little bit about some estimates that we have on some of those data from 2019. So let me go ahead and get started and share with you our agenda. So we'll focus on the population growth for the city and the region. We'll look at Austin's unique diversity as well as the diversity in the 5-county region. We'll dive into some particular areas of growth, and then I'll recap and sort of focus on some findings that our city offers us to celebrate, and then some other findings that probably require a little bit more reflection and time to ponder and consider, what is happening there. So let's start with the big one, right? Population growth. These data are the first opportunity for local communities to be able to see their official 2020 census count. But before those data were released, the apportionment data were released. And so that's what's covered in this chart here. And so basically, the state of Texas is growing, and it's growing at a very, very rapid pace, over twice as fast as that of the nation. And it added more people than any other state in the country. This is not surprising. The state of Texas has been adding more people every year than any other state in the country since about 2006 or so. But during the 2020 census count, what we found is that the state of Texas added nearly 4 million people and is growing at a rate of about 15.9%. And we are now at a total population of 29,145,505 people. This allowed us to gain 2 additional congressional seats, more than any other state in the nation gained. But I do want to add that projections going into the 2020 census count actually showed that we could gain up to 3 congressional seats, and population count could surpass over 4 million gains, and putting us over that 30 million mark. And so we didn't quite get to those levels, but we are still growing very, very rapidly and added more people than any other state. When we take a look at the growth that we're seeing throughout the state, what we can see is that the growth isn't geographically evenly distributed. And I hear that some of you may have attended a legislative session where my colleague Helen Yu may have presented some of these similar findings. And so you'll see in the darker brown shaded areas, these are the areas of the state that are really adding the largest numbers of people and have the greatest numeric increases between 2010 and 2020. And of course, what stands out is that population triangle in our state that's anchored by the major metropolitan areas in the state of Dallas and Fort Worth to the north, and then over in the east, Harris County, or where Houston is located, and then of course over to the west, San Antonio and the city of Austin, where we are today. We also see significant population concentrations along the Rio Grande Valley. We also see some similar growth in the El Paso area, also the Midland Odessa area, boosted through a lot of the oil and gas industry boom, and then as well as in Potter County, or in Lubbock County. And so the state and the growth in the state is really being driven by its metropolitan areas. And of course, one of those main areas is going to be the Austin metro area and its cities. And so here you take a look at the growth that we're seeing in the city of Austin. The 2020 census basically revealed continued growth for our city. Our city has been doubling its population about every 20 to 25 years. And so I put some benchmarks here for you. For instance, in 1970, we were at about 250,000 population. Between 1990 and 2000, we surpassed that 500,000 mark. And now 20 years later, we're just shy of 1 million at 961,855 population for the city. And the city of Austin remains the 11th largest city in the country, but its growth is really rivaling the growth of the nation's largest cities. Only 3 other cities in the country added more people than the city of Austin, and that includes the city of New York, Houston, and Fort Worth. And between 2010 and 2020, the city of Austin added about 171,000 people, growing at a rate of about 21.7%. So you'll recall the state of Texas was growing at a rate of 15.9%. The city of Austin is growing at a 21.7%. And for as fast as the city is growing, the region is growing even faster. Among metropolitan areas with over 1 million in population, the Austin metro was the fastest growing metro every single year this past decade. And the Austin metro area is growing at about 21.7%. The city of Austin is growing at about 21.7%. The Austin metro area is growing at 33%. And they've added over 500,000 people throughout the decade. Of that total growth, the total over 500,000, Austin has contributed about 30% of that total growth. With Hays County being the 3rd fastest and Williamson County the 11th fastest county in the nation, we definitely know that this region is growing, and it's growing very rapidly. Here's a chart that looks at the individual counties within the Austin metro region. And really what the chart lets us know is that even though Travis County is having the largest gains, all of the surrounding counties, with the exception of Caldwell, are growing much faster, right? So we're seeing gains of 265,000, over 265,000 for Travis, over 186,000 for Williamson, and over 83,000 for Hays. But you see that the growth rates for Hays and for Williamson County are nearly double that of what they are for Travis County. And then this here takes a look at surrounding cities in Central Texas. So for as fast as Austin is growing, the surrounding cities are also growing much faster. A number of the cities that are listed here have actually been at the top of the list of the Census Bureau's fastest growing cities in the country in recent years. So for instance, Cedar Park and Leander were at the top of those lists in 2018 and 2019. But also growing very rapidly are cities like Manor and Buda and Hutto. One thing I want to mention is that even though Austin's share of the metro area is slower or smaller today than it used to be in the past, and even though these surrounding cities are growing much faster than Austin, the bulk of the growth still originates here in the city of Austin. So for instance, if you take a look at its largest neighbor to the north, the city of Round Rock, the numeric increase that they experienced between 2010 and 2020 is really just about 1/10 of the growth that was seen in the city of Austin. And when you look at the large increase that was seen in Leander, that still is only about 2/10 of the growth that was seen in the city of Austin. So the bulk of the growth is still taking place right here in the city. And as the population is growing in the city of Austin, so is the number of housing units. And so in 2020, we had over 444,000 housing units, and we grew and expanded that by over 90,000 since 2010 at a rate of growth of 25.5%. And so even though the number of housing units is larger this decade than it has been in the past, the rate of growth slowed down this decade. But what we're seeing also is that the vacancy rate is also going down. So it declined from 8.3% in 2010 to 7.6% in 2020. And so that indicates that as new housing units are coming into the market, they are quickly being absorbed as well. It's important to consider here that, as I mentioned earlier, these redistricting data don't give us a lot of additional information about housing units. And so they don't include characteristics such as housing type or number of bedrooms, and really any other characteristics that could further inform how well this housing stock actually matches the housing needs of the population. So we'll have to wait a little bit to get that additional information. And then here, what we're taking a look at is the housing unit counts in the neighborhoods the counties in the metro area. And so you can see that housing is growing in all of these surrounding neighborhoods. The pattern of quick absorption with a low vacancy rate applies here too. Housing growth rates are all greater than the rate of population growth, but they're also very fairly close to each other, highlighting the importance of maintaining that housing growth in order to be able to keep pace with population growth. And so now let's take a look at that population and the people who live within these households. So this is the race and ethnicity, this section where we'll discuss the race and ethnicity of the city of Austin, and I'll provide similar information for the counties in the metro area. I know this is a hefty table with a lot of numbers, so I'm going to walk you through it. But before I do that, I want to share just a little bit of context. So the city's population grew, and along with it, all of its race ethnicity groups grew as well. They all grew between 2010 and 2020, which was not the case between 2000 and 2010, especially for the African American population in the city of Austin. But throughout the country and the state, population growth was largely driven by populations of color. In fact, in the state of Texas, 95% of the total growth in the last decade can be attributed to populations of color. But here in the city of Austin, we see something a little bit different. And so this is where I want you to follow along with me in the table. If we start at the bottom right corner of the table, you'll see that 39.5%. This indicates the biggest driver of growth in the city of Austin was the non-Hispanic white population. They contributed nearly 40% of all the growth in the last decade. They expanded by over 67,000 people to a total population of 452,994. This is at a time when in the country, for the first time in 230 years, we experienced a decline in the number of people identifying as non-Hispanic white. So seeing such a strong growth in this community in the city is quite unique. Now, if you go to the next column to the left, this column shows the fastest growing groups. And so the fastest growing race ethnicity group was the group who said that there is no race that was provided in the Census Bureau form that they used to identify themselves. And so basically they selected some other race group and wrote in their own self-identification. This group grew by over 3,000 and more than quadrupled in size between 2010 and 2020. Another fast-growing race ethnicity group was the multiracial group, or the group that's made up of two or more races. For both of these groups, some of the growth can also be attributed to some of the changes in coding that were made by the Census Bureau, but really these two groups had already been growing for some time. And in fact, some of that growth may also be contributed by societal changes in the way people are identifying themselves. The Asian population was the fastest growing single race group. They contributed over 21% of the total growth in the last decade and make up over, their rate of growth was about 75% in the last 10 years. And of every 5 people that were added to the Austin population, one of them was of Asian descent. Hispanics also made up about 20% of the growth in the city in the last decade, but this compares with about a 50% at the national and at the state levels. Hispanic residents in Austin grew by over 34,000 to a total population of 312,448 people. And then the African American population also grew this decade, but at a slower rate. Black residents grew by about 5,200 people to a total population of 66,002 persons. Now, this is during a time when there's very strong migration by African Americans from cities in the north to cities in the south, including the city of Dallas and the city of Houston. And I'll give you an example. Fort Worth was one of the cities that added more people than the city of Austin, but it's also very similarly sized to the city. In Fort Worth, between 2010 and 2020, they added nearly 40,000 African Americans compared to our about 5,000. And they added over 67,000 Hispanics compared to about 34,000 that we added in the city of Austin. So the type of growth that we're seeing in the city of Austin is really unique. Now, let me show you our visual representation of our city's diversity, right? This is the typical pie chart that we show, that we use to depict the racial makeup of an area. And what we see in the city of Austin is that no race ethnicity group makes up a majority. However, the non-Hispanic white population continues to make up the largest share of the total population at 47%. This is a slight drop from about 49% in 2010. The Hispanic population also saw a decrease in its share from 2010. It dropped about 3 percentage points to 32.5%. The Asian population is now the third largest race ethnicity group, and they make up nearly 9% of the total population, which is up from about 6% in 2010. And the Black population makes up about 7% of the total population in 2020. And this is about 1 percentage point lower than it was at the start of the decade. And here is a similar breakdown for the individual counties in the Austin metro region. And so in Bastrop County, and I kept the colors of the race ethnicity categories the same. And so in Bastrop County, what we're seeing is that Latinos are really driving growth in this county. And there was an actual drop in the number of African Americans. In Caldwell County, we're seeing that most of the growth, almost all of it, like in the 90%, was driven by Latinos. And there was concurrent declines in the white and Black and Asian populations in this county. In Hays County, we're seeing growth really largely driven by Hispanics and non-Hispanic white population. And then the third largest group in this county is actually the multiracial group and people who identify with 2 or more races. And then in Williamson County, what we're seeing is that growth is pretty well dispersed by race and ethnicity. So there's a pretty even distribution. And the Asian population now is the third largest race ethnicity group. And then here's Travis County, where again, this is going to be much more similar to the city of Austin's pattern. Growth here is driven by non-Hispanic white population. The Asian population is now also the third largest race ethnicity group. The data that I'm sharing with you provide information on the voting age population. And so this is the population that's 18 years of age and older. And so if we take the total population and we subtract the 18 and older, we can also get a look at the child population. And so what we're looking at here is sort of the 18 and older population and then the child population. The child population makes up about 15% of the city's total population, which is in line with the nation. And what we're seeing also, though, is that the adult population is larger than the child population, but it's less diverse. And it's actually becoming less diverse than it used to be in 2010. So I'll remind you that in the city of Austin, there was no race ethnicity group that made up a majority of the total population. But among adults 18 and older, just over 50% identify as non-Hispanic white, making up the majority of the population. And this is actually an increase in the share because in 2010, non-Hispanic white population made up about 42.5%. So the adult population is less diverse, and it's actually becoming even less diverse in time. Now, the child population is a lot more diverse. And there's about 186,000 children in the city of Austin, and about 44% of them are of Hispanic descent or Hispanic origin. And when we look to see what race ethnicity groups are really driving growth in the child population, what we find is that the Asian, non-Hispanic white, and multiracial populations are the ones that are really driving growth. In fact, of every 10 children that were added in the last decade, 6 of those children were of Asian descent. And what we are also seeing is an actual decline in the number of African American and Latino children in the city of Austin. A lot of times as demographers, we look to the child population to try to get a sense of what the future of an area may look like. And so in the case of Austin, we see fewer African American and Latino children. And in the future, that could indicate fewer Latino and Black adults. Now here is the makeup of children and adults, the share of children and adults in the individual counties in the Austin metro region. And so you can see that children make up a larger share of the population in counties outside of Travis County and outside of the principal city of Austin. So you can see that the highest share of children can be found in Williamson County and Caldwell counties. Bastrop also has a higher share, and then Hayes and Travis have lower shares of children. And then this looks at the growth in the child population. And basically, the child population is growing in all of the counties in the region, but particular groups are growing across all counties. So for instance, the Hispanic, the multiracial, and the children of another race, they are increasing in all of the counties. The Black population actually declined in Bastrop, Caldwell, and Travis County. This is just for Black children. And then white children declined in Bastrop and Caldwell, and Asian children declined in Caldwell County. And now we can look at some maps and start looking at areas of growth. I'm going to show a couple of maps at the city level and then most maps at the metro region, but I also include a link at the end of the presentation to an interactive web map series where you can click on individual areas in the map and you get to see the population of the area, the demographic makeup of the area, and you can also see change between 2010 and 2020. So I won't go into a lot of detail on the maps, hoping that you'll take some time to look at some of the more detail that's available in the interactive map series, because a lot of times it's much more interesting to see, particular areas that we're interested in, and it's harder to show a lot of this information in a static map. But so here in this first set of maps, what I'm showing you is the total population in the city of Austin. The map on the left shows population density in 2020, and then the map on the right shows population change between 2010 and 2020. The population density, the darker shaded areas are the areas that have the denser population. And so basically what you can see here is that the more densely populated areas of the city can be found along that central I-35 corridor. In particular, I'll use my marker here to show you, in particular in the University of Texas area, the downtown Austin area, but you also see some densely populated areas all the way in the North Runberg area, as well as around the Domain area. You see some increased population density in the Southeast, as well as in the Northwest. The map on the right looks at population change. And I guess before I move on from density, I'll just mention that in the city of Austin overall, population density has increased. In 2010, we had a population density of about 2,600 persons per square mile. And in 2020, we are up to 3,000 persons per square mile. Now, the map on the right looks at population change, and that's between 2010 and 2020. So areas of growth are shown in white as well as in blue, with the largest numeric increases are in the blue shaded areas. And then the areas of growth and decline are shown in pink and red. And so for the most part, most of the tracts in the city of Austin added population between 2010 and 2020, but particularly high growth can be seen in the areas of Mueller, in the areas of the Domain. We can see a lot of that growth if you zoom in into the areas around West Campus. And we also see that there are significant areas of growth in Northeast, Northwest, and the outlying areas of the city, right? Population decline can be seen in most markedly in this area of Onion Creek. That's the flood mitigation buyout by the city. And so we saw a lot of people moving out of that area. We also see some population decline in the Dove Springs area, the St. John's and Coronado Hills area, and North Lamar. We also see that the tract that houses the University of Texas itself also experienced population decline. And then here are some maps that are looking at the regional distribution of the geographic distribution of the population of the metro area. And so the darker shaded areas are where more people are residing and can be found. One of the things I do want to mention is that the maps that I'm showing you are in a geography known as a census tract. And many of you may be familiar with these geographies, but these geographies have population thresholds. And so as you go to outlying areas of the city or to more rural parts of a county, the population thresholds require more land to be met. And so some of the areas are larger in terms of area. And so they can stand out in a map and really look like sprawl. I'm not going to say we're not having any sprawl. That's definitely something that has been taking place in the city of Austin and in many Texas cities and cities around the country for some time. So that's definitely part of it. But I do want to make you aware that some of the population may actually live closer to the city limits than what it appears like because of the size of the land area of those census tracts geographies. But as you can see, there is a larger population in the outlying areas, population mostly concentrated in Hays County along the I-35 corridor in the northwest parts of Round Rock, and a lot of population in that northeastern part of Travis County. And then this map looks at the population change. So this is going to be change from 2010 to 2020. Again, growth indicated in blue, decline shown in red. And what we can see here is that there's a lot of growth taking place in the sort of surrounding areas of the city of Austin, as well as in this densely populated area of Williamson County, and all along the I-35 corridor stretching through Hays County. We also see significant growth in the northwestern part of Caldwell County, as well as some growth in the northeastern part of Williamson County. And then here again, this is just a reminder that even though the city of Austin makes up a smaller share of the total growth that we're seeing in the metro region, it's still a larger share than is shown for principal cities in some of our neighboring metro areas like the Dallas Metro and Houston Metro. Their growth actually makes up a much smaller share of the total regional growth in those areas. And then this next set of maps looks at the geographic distribution of the Asian population with the census tracts that are shaded in darker shades of green having larger shares of Asian population. And so we can see that there is significant high shares of Asian population in Williamson County and northeastern Travis, as well as northwest Travis, and then as well as in Southwest Austin. We also see higher concentrations of Asian population in those densely populated areas of the Domain, the University of Texas, and then somewhere right south of the river in some of those densely populated areas. Here is the geographic distribution of the African-American population, the higher shares of African-American population shown in green, and we can see that there are higher African-American population concentrations in the northeastern part of Travis County. In fact, we're seeing more growth farther east in the city limits of Austin, so that that eastern crescent that we talk about sometimes is essentially moving farther east with more African-Americans residing in northeastern parts of Travis County and southeastern parts of Williamson County. We also see some concentrations in Bastrop and in southern Hays County. This is the map for the Hispanic population, and we see a little bit of an inverse where the southeastern parts of Travis County have higher shares of Hispanic population, again, driving that eastern crescent farther east and southeast for the Hispanic population. And you can also see some higher concentrations of Hispanic along North Austin and along the North Dessau stretch of the area, and then all along 130. And then this last map is the non-Hispanic white population, which shows the darker shaded areas of blue having higher shares of non-Hispanic white population. We can see those in more rural parts of Bastrop and Caldwell counties, as well as in areas in Williamson County around Georgetown, as well as western parts of Austin, and then the western parts of Hayes County. And of course, with a lot of this growth that we're seeing into the Austin metro region, we are all experiencing some growing pains. There is about 47 people that are added to the Austin population every day. And this is not just added through people moving in. Many more people are moving in daily, but we're also accounting here for births minus deaths, and then also people who move out. And so this is a net 47 people added every day, about 155 net increase in the metro area. Of course, this is yielding increased commute times for many people now commuting over 30 minutes or well over an hour. And as that Eastern Crescent moves farther eastward, then we can recognize that some of these additional burdens in terms of commute times are disproportionately affecting communities of color. Median home prices in the area are now at 536,000, well over $500,000, with a monthly housing inventory of about a month. This has actually gone down since the month of August, where it peaked at about 550,000 for a median home price. And as the housing market and housing prices start to balance out a little bit more, they are actually spilling over into rental prices, where now we are seeing that folks who are not able to compete in that housing market are now looking for places to rent, further driving up those rental prices, which have increased by 18% since last year, with an average rent in the city of Austin of over $1,500 a month. And so when we look at these data, one of the things that I like to do is to consider, right, what do these data offer us in terms of celebrations? They offer us a lot, right? Our city is growing, and its growth is rivaling that of our country's largest cities. The growth in the housing, in terms of housing, is keeping pace with population growth. Our vacancy rates are also relatively low. Growth is seen in all of our race ethnicity communities, and it's helping to yield increased diversity for our population as a whole. But these findings also give us an opportunity to reflect on some things that we have been seeing, for some time now, and we are seeing yet again in our 2020 census count. We are seeing a continued geographic segregation of our communities of color, with concurrent farther eastward movement of populations of color, and eastward movement of that non-Hispanic white population into more historic neighborhoods that were once populated by communities of color, in particular African Americans and Hispanics. We're also concerned because we're seeing a decreasing rate in the growth of housing. The population growth rate was lower than the housing growth rate in all of our counties, but it's also a little bit uncomfortably close. So we need to ensure that housing growth continues to keep pace with our population growth. We have too strong of a long and sustained trend of growth in our city and in our metro area to take that lightly. We really need to focus on adding more housing. And another thing that we might want to reflect on is that unique pattern of growth that we're seeing among Hispanics and African Americans, especially among Black and Latino children. As I mentioned to you, populations of color are really driving growth across the country and across the state. Yet here in the city of Austin, we are seeing something a little bit different. And then, of course, fast growth is going to be applying disproportionate burdens on communities of color, not just in terms of longer commutes, but as they start to move farther and farther east, they have less access to available amenities like health clinics and grocery stores and quality childcare centers. So these are all findings that I think, in order for all of our communities to be able to join in on that celebration of these findings of growth and vibrancy for our city, we really do want to try to find some answers or try to uncover contributors to this unique pattern of growth in the city. And then I want to wrap up just by sharing with you our demographics website. We have our interactive web map series there that you can access. We also have a data request form that if you are looking for some data, you should feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to get that to you. And then of course now, if you want to receive occasional updates from us about new products that we have available, you can sign up to our distribution list, and you'll receive information about those as soon as they're available. And that's what I've prepared for you today. So I'm going to pass this back to Daniel in case anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to start with a thank you. That was just as informative as the several other times that I've been able to partake in different types and different cuts of this data. So I want to open the floor up to anybody who has questions for Dr. Valencia about what you've heard and what you've seen. Could the link be shared again? Dr. Valencia, can you put the link into the chat for us?
For the presentation slides or for the website? I'm sorry.
For the website.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have a question that is, have there been any estimates as to how the pandemic may have impacted the census results?
So there have not been estimates, but we are in the process of doing some evaluation. And so basically, right now, what we have available to us are estimates that are produced in-house by the City of Austin. We have estimates that are produced by the Census Bureau. We have estimates that are produced by reliable partners like the Texas Demographic Center. All of those estimates are based on the 2010 census. And so they're estimates, right? And those come with their own sort of challenges and shortcomings. And then we know that we have the 2020 census count, which of course was, challenged in a number of ways, from over politicization to the global pandemic to just so many different ways. And the thing is that we can compare those to one another, but at the end of the day, we just don't know which one's the right one. And so what we're waiting for is what's called the Post-Enumeration Survey. That Post-Enumeration Survey has actually also been impacted by the pandemic, but the Census Bureau continues to collect information. And so basically what they do is they take a sample of the people who responded to the 2020 census and they re-interview them to see how well their responses match up to the 2020 census count responses. And then they are able to make conclusions about areas that were undercounted, particular populations that may have been undercounted. But this post-enumeration survey information and their findings won't be available until 2022. And so we don't have any information yet that gives us any real indication that there is significant concern. And we have actually seen at the national level, the American Statistical Association, the Urban Institute, they've done studies where at the national level, they're saying the census, yes, it had its challenges, but the overall, top level counts seem to be okay, seem to be stable. But we all know that really the proof is in the pudding, right? As we start to disaggregate the data, that's where we're going to start to uncover more issues. And so we're doing our own internal evaluations, looking at permitting data and housing counts in our internal data to try to understand if there are some areas in the count that are particularly concerning. And the Census Bureau has a process for appealing those. And so we are currently in the midst of trying to figure out if we need to go through that process. But at this point in time, We don't have any significant evidence that the count is not reliable.
Okay. Our next question is from Dr. Jenna Cullinane-Hagee, the Vice Chancellor for Institutional Research and Analytics. Austin's growth is a function of both in-migration and local births. What's the balance of these and how does it compare to other Texas cities? And how might this play into the unique growth patterns by race ethnicity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely. So we're talking here about what we refer to as components of population change, right? And in the city of Austin, Texas as a whole has a pretty well balanced, about half of the growth comes from migration, and then the other half comes from natural increase. In the city of Austin and in Travis County, about 3/4 of the growth come from migration. And then the quarter comes from natural increase. When we look at our birth rates, we are seeing a decline, but when we look at our total births, we are seeing growth. And so we know that we continue to grow our child population, but the bulk of the growth is coming from migration, and it's mostly coming from domestic migration. And so for me, one of the most interesting subsets of the population in the city of Austin is the Asian population. So for instance, I mentioned to you of every 10 children that were added this last decade, about 6 of those children were Asian children. And the Asian population is really growing by all of these components of change. So they're growing from international migration, they're growing from domestic migration. So even if when they left their country, they arrived at a coastal city like San Diego or San Francisco or New York, eventually they make their way to Texas through domestic migration, and they're most likely to come to the city of Austin if they move to Texas. And so they're growing from international migration, from domestic migration, as well as from natural increase. And so we're seeing a lot of that in our child growth patterns. And then of course, we're seeing some movement out of the city from particularly families of color. And we're seeing that in changes in median household incomes in particular areas where we know more often Hispanic and African American families used to live. And now those median household incomes are really shooting up. And so we know that they have moved out of those areas and more affluent people have moved in. So that's sort of the trend. It's about 75-25. And so really it is a very fast growing sort of pattern of growth as well. And that's why we're seeing some of that fast growth. And of course, that makes us even harder to count as a city and as a metro region.
Thank you. So somebody does have a question about the maps. There's a question as to whether they can overlay community foundation and other nonprofit and city housing that's being developed and addressing any issues of homelessness. Do you have that ability within your online maps?
So I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. If the question is about, can we have these maps in a digital format where we can overlay that information? Absolutely, we would be happy to share that with you so that you can do that. Do they particularly address some of those issues? Not necessarily. In particular, the homeless count is a separate count of the 2020 census. And what they do is they include the homeless population to an extent in what's called the group quarters population, and then as well as in the total population. But we're not able to determine exactly where the homeless population live within the city. That's actually something that the Census Bureau highly relies on local experts to be able to tell them where that's taking place. And those partnerships happen during the 2020 census count. So that information is available with those partners, but we aren't able to take out of the total 961,000 population in the city of Austin. This many are experiencing homelessness. We can't do that with the 2020 census data.
Okay. So we have another question from Dr. Richard Griffiths. And this one is, are we seeing any, our changes that we're seeing here, are they similar to the demographic changes that you might know of from Silicon Valley, being that we are being known as now Silicon Valley 2, or it's the new tech hub with so much coming here from Tesla and the potential expansion with Samsung and other chip manufacturers.
Right, Silicon Hills is what they used to call us as well, right? And so are we seeing similar patterns in terms of demographic makeup? Not really, but in terms of socioeconomic characteristics and in terms of the impacts on housing, absolutely. There are definitely some parallels. One of the things that makes the city of Austin very interesting is that a lot of the migration that does take place, migration overall is generally an economic phenomena. And so people typically move to the city of Austin and to anywhere else for a better job or for a different job. And so right now, the biggest magnet to our city is the tech industry. And as the tech industry and people who work in that industry move to our city, it affects the demographic makeup of our city, right? And so the people who work in that industry tend to have higher median household incomes. They also tend to be relatively homogenous in terms of racial makeup. So they're more often non-Hispanic white and Asian in demographic makeup. And so that's exactly who we're seeing growing in our city. And so absolutely the connection between the drivers in the economy and the demographic of the makeup of the city are absolutely intertwined.
Okay. Well, as we're coming up, I think we have time for one more question, and this one's a little bit about more on the diversity conversation, we'll call it. Do we know how much of the growth in the suburbs is from people moving out of Austin, out to the second ring, third ring, and out to those that further moving crescent, as it's called, versus those that are coming from elsewhere, such as either interstate or intrastate?
Yeah, and this is a challenging question, right? Because none of the data that we look at follow actual individuals, right? We just get cross-sectional data at points in time. But when we look at changes, like for instance, when I was talking about changes in median household incomes for a particular area, that's where we're able to kind of connect some dots. And there are some estimates in the American Community Survey that suggest that people who move from other Texas cities, because the majority of people who are moving are actually moving from other Texas cities. They're not moving from out of state. Like that's a significant share, but a much larger share is people moving from other Texas cities. When they're moving from other Texas cities, they're more likely to move to the outlying areas of the city and the suburbs, as well as some of the surrounding counties in the metro region other than Travis County. But when they move from out of state, they're much more likely to move to the city of Austin, and many times are actually moving to those more densely populated areas of high density growth in the Domain area, the Mueller area, and the downtown area. So there are definitely some differences in the patterns of residency for people depending on how they're migrating here.
Okay. And I'm going to take point of personal privilege and ask the last question. So it's a big question about what I see, and you were just presenting with the data, is segregation. There's more people coming in. Minorities are moving further out from the center city core, which would intuitively sort of make me think that there's a higher proportion of non-Hispanic white that are living in the center core. And so any thoughts or comments to leave us with on that, as we would sense and see a growing segregation, both in area and distance, and what that could lead to for challenges in the future for city and for Austin Community College.
Sure. So yeah, that is a huge question. And I think it's a question that many of our elected officials and policymakers are struggling through as they're trying to make decisions on the provision of services. And, we have, the big Project Connect project going on right now. And we've got so many other, development projects going on throughout the city. And many of those resources are being made available in that central core. And so as those amenities and those additional offers get poured into that central core area, absolutely, that's going to apply pressures to the remaining families of color who are there. And so what can be done to make sure that those families are able to stay and withstand some of those pressures instead of having to move out? Because I think what we're finding right through this entire pandemic is that we are seeing how much of the burdens are of societal burdens, economic burdens, are disproportionately impacting communities of color. And so if we keep doing the same thing, if we keep expanding that central corridor without putting any guardrails to really help communities of color stay in place, we could further exacerbate that farther eastward movement of the Eastern Crescent and really start to challenge those communities even more, right, in terms of increased commutes, less access. And so I think as that movement does happen, because it has happened, the census count shows us, we do also need to start to think about how can we start to provide services to those areas that, once there was not a whole lot of people living there, but now there is. And if we continue to build down that corridor, we really need to make sure that we don't forget those outlying areas as well. And I hope that answers your question a little bit, Daniel, because it is a doozy, but yes, absolutely. It's definitely, whenever we are putting programs in place, it's definitely a good idea to start to think, what is going to be the unintended consequence of this process, this project, or this service? Yeah.
And so I want to conclude honoring everybody's time. Thank you, Dr. Valencia. It was incredible listening to you again. I will follow up with you. If you could send me the PowerPoint slides, then we will be again hosting this video. If everybody could give a round to Dr. Valencia from the City of Austin. Thank you very much for helping us as we move forward with our conversations in diversity, equity, and student success.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Daniel, for making this happen. Thank you so much, Dr. Valencia.
Thank you.